context on why we're hosting this event today. Again, welcome. This is Beyond the Fields, a rural town hall discussion. Like I said, I'm here with Little Lobbyists. I truly believe this is one of the most important conversations we can be having right now, so thank you so much for joining us. For those of you who do not know who Little Lobbyists are, we are a family-led organization that advocates for children with complex medical needs and disabilities. Our work is rooted in making sure policy decisions reflect the real lives of children and families, especially those who are too often left out of the conversation. And for me, that conversation is deeply personal. I grew up with deaf parents. My younger brother was born with Hirschsprung's disease, and before he was 5 years old, he'd already had 4 major surgeries. At that time, we were living on a farm in New Douglas, Illinois. If you have not been there, it's real country. And I still remember what it meant every time he needed to see specialists at the children's hospital. It was not a quick trip. It took an entire day. The driving, the appointments, missed work on behalf of our caregivers, the logistics, and even as a child, I understood that where a family lives can shape the kind of care and support that you're able to access. Fast forward to 2020, I have my son, Logan, who's being a little grunt-faced. He was born 3 months early and later diagnosed with 5P- syndrome, and we spent 125 days in the NICU. Even though that was during COVID, I remember meeting parents whose babies were hospitalized and they lived 4 or more hours away from the NICU. They could only go there on weekends to visit their child because they just could not afford to stop working. Just imagine that for a moment, being a brand new parent and having to leave your baby at a hospital that is hours away because the specialized care you need does not exist where you live. I was fortunate enough to be living near a hospital at that time, but many Kansas families do not have that privilege, and that reality matters here. Kansas has 1 level 4 NICU in the entire state. It's in Johnson County. And our state is facing one of the highest rates in the country of rural hospitals at immediate risk of closure. Even in Johnson County, where I live now, our family still struggles to find certain specialists like orthodontics and other pediatric specialty services that accept Medicaid. And that is just healthcare. Kansas, like much of the country, is facing a broader affordability crisis. The industries that our state depends on, like agriculture, healthcare, education, local small business, are all feeling the pressure of rising costs, workforce shortages, and difficult state and federal funding decisions. These decisions determine whether families can stay in the communities that they love, children can access specialists, schools can retain teachers, hospitals can keep their doors open, and whether rural and small town Kansas can continue to thrive. And that's why this discussion matters. This panel is bringing together leaders, policymakers, and experts who can help us talk honestly about changes facing rural and small town Kansas right now. And the truth is this: it will take bipartisan discussions and conversations and solutions to bring meaningful relief to Kansas while protecting our children, our most vulnerable families, and our elderly neighbors. I would just like to say, please, if you don't know Little Lobbyists, say hi to us after the event. I know our panelists are going to stick around. We do have some candidates here. Talk to the Young Dems, to Riley County Dems, get more information, and please network with each other because it's so important for us to know our neighbors. So with that, I do want to thank Kansas State Young Dems for hosting us. This is a beautiful venue. Really appreciate you. And I'm honored to hand it over to Samantha if you wanted to do a quick introduction, and then we'll get started with our panel. Thank you, guys.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming on this Easter weekend. I would love to have seen more students here, but that's just the way that K-State goes. Everyone goes home to be with their families on Easter weekend. Can we get a big round of applause for Mel for organizing this whole event? She's done a fabulous job. I'm so happy and lucky that the Young Dems were able to help facilitate a venue for this, and the Young Dems are always super happy to be involved with anything we can get our hands on. This is a great experience for us, great exposure for us. So if there's any events in the future that you guys would like help with or to collaborate with, we're down to do anything, and we always love doing a bipartisan forum or town hall. So thank you all for being here, and super happy to get started.
Good afternoon. Can you all hear me okay? Okay. First of all, welcome, and we are glad that you all made a trip down here, and we are hoping to get some good information on today. Before I get started, there's a couple things I would like to do. I would like to let you know that we're going to try to complete this session in a timely manner. We should be done right around 7 tonight. We're going to be done a lot sooner than that. Some of y'all looking at me like, what? No, we're going to get done a lot sooner than that. But the very first thing I want to do is introduce myself, and then we're going to introduce the panelists. I am Peter Adams. I'm a graduate of Rockhurst University. I'm a retiree from Jackson County Family Court. After 34 years, I retired in what's called the EAJ, Emerging Adult Justice Program. That's a program that where when young people are 17 and they commit a low-level felony, we try to find community service projects for them to do so they won't go into adulthood with a felony on their record. I own a mentoring program called Team Hollywood Celebrity Street Ball, which is a mentoring program. Please follow it on Facebook. And I am an urban farmer with the Kansas Black Farmers Association. And we're glad to be represented here today. The very first person I'm going to introduce on the panel is Mr. Will Westmoreland. Mr. Westmoreland is the founder of the Back 40 and the executive director of Back 40 Action. He brings a rare and genuine voice rooted in the heart of rural America. Mr. Westmoreland, please.
Call me Will.
Next, we have Senator Cindy Holscher. Senator Holscher was born in Slater, Missouri, and resides in Overland Park. She holds degrees in journalism, political science from the University of Missouri. I don't know if I can say that loud here. As a representative and then senator of the 8th District, she is committed to fighting for fully funded public schools, access to affordable health care, domestic violence reform, and common sense policies that keep Kansas moving forward. And she's also a candidate to be our next governor of the great state of Kansas. Next, we have Representative Mark Schreiber, a long-life Kansan. Representative Schreiber has lived in his district for more than 32 years. After graduating from Emporia State University, he worked 37 years with KG&E and Westar Energy. He brings a business perspective to the legislature and believes that truly representing his district requires a deep involvement with community. Representative Schreiber. And last but definitely not least, Ms. Christy Davis, a 5th generation Kansan who has worked with communities in all 105 counties over her 25-year career. Most recently, she served as a White House appointee for USDA rural development during the Biden administration. She is a small business owner and a consultant based in Cottonwood Falls. Ms. Christy Davis. Okay, and as we start, we have some questions that were prepared, reviewed, prepared, and we're going to start with the questions. We got one mic that we're going to share, and we'll pass it around. And we're going to ask you all to be mindful of this is not a debate, so we're not going to be strict on time, but we want to be mindful to try to keep our answers under 15, 20 minutes. 2 to 3 minutes. So let me kick it off with the first question. And we can start, anyone on the panel can start, and anyone can share and elaborate. If we need clarification, then I will ask for clarification. Okay, When you think about the future of rural and small town Kansas, what issues feel most urgent right now? And if you need me to repeat the question, I can do that.
Well, first, I live, you mentioned Cottonwood Falls. I live in a town of 900, so I'm in the middle of it. You all know this, rural communities have been left behind for far too long. I've been involved in policies to try to make things better. The key issues that transcend every geographic area in the state, rural, urban, and suburban, though, are the same, and that's healthcare and education. I live in a community where we already have a countywide school district, and if we don't have funding for our public school, our community's gone. And that's an entire county with a great history. I also just want to say too, something urgent that was brought to my attention this week and was concerning for me, and especially since you're here. You mentioned the Kansas Black Farmers Association. That is an organization that is sponsored in part through Kansas State University. It's an amazing organization, and they were founded in part because of inequities in our in USDA programming, and particularly to access to credit and land. We just learned last week that the Trump administration cut $300 million from funding that was made for those types of programs that would have helped not just Kansas Black Farmers Association, but also Cultivate KC and Nicodemus and other rural communities that are tied to that. And that's what's chapping my hide this week, and it's an urgent concern. I just wanted to share. Thanks.
I have to stand up. Just worse about it. Pete, thank you for being here. Mel, thank you for organizing. Will, thank you for joining us. Kansas Young Democrats, K-State, thank you for having this event today. I've done over 70 town halls across the state, and I will tell you, kind of to Christy's point, affordability. That's what I'm hearing in rural areas, urban areas, everywhere. And that affordability crisis, it comes down to lack of access to affordable housing, healthcare, and childcare. And again, that is across the board very much in rural areas. I will tell you, and I'm wearing my Got Water shirt today because that's the other issue I keep hearing about in rural areas. Ogallala Aquifer, as you all likely know, for many years we've been kind of heading towards potential depletion. Ogallala is a huge resource utilized by not just Kansas, but nationwide in terms of the water supply. So that is very much on people's minds. And I will tell you, there are a lot of Kansas farmers out there that very much are thinking about what technology they can use in terms of irrigation and what they can do to be better stewards. And looking forward, what I see is that what can we do on the state level to incent and bring forward that technology more across the board across Kansas to ensure that, again, that we are being good stewards of the resources that we have there. Again, as we look at the Ogallala itself, I believe, we are looking at potentially depletion within the next 25 years is the most recent numbers that I'm seeing. So, like I said, it's one of those things that I'm glad I'm hearing it coming up as I go across the state, because it shows me that it's on people's minds. So that, along again with the affordability crisis, is something that we have to address in terms of making sure that life is more affordable for Kansans.
All right. I'm glad to be here, and thanks to Mel for organizing this. I think from a rural area perspective, I grew up in Garden City, born and raised there, and then Emporia is a very similar situated city, just a little bit further east. But I'd have to echo the comment about healthcare availability, especially in the rural areas. I was born at St. Catherine's Hospital in Garden City, and my sister still lives there, and she told me, this is a year or two back, that they stopped having OB services in Garden, and so if you had a scheduled delivery, you had to drive to Liberal, which is about 60 miles south of Garden, to have your baby. I've heard that they do have an obstetrician now that's on staff there, but it's just a reflection of how healthcare has kind of declined in our rural areas, and they're making do, but it does provide or result in more hurdles for them. I think the other piece that we need to talk more about, and we've talked about it a lot in the legislature, is mental health care. This is something that's especially needed in the rural areas with farmers and so forth. With talk about affordability and just being able to stay on the farm. That is really a needed service, and out there you have to travel quite a ways to find services like that. So I think that's a key piece of healthcare that needs to be addressed within our rural areas.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate it. I want to thank Kansas State too. I'm a Missouri State University alumni, and we may not know we've got a financial arrangement with K-State. But every 4 years we schedule a football game with you, and we come over and you beat us by 60 points, but we take home a check for $1 million. So thank you. I appreciate that. No, all kidding aside, I think out-migration is the biggest problem in rural America right now, including Kansas. That's a fancy word for all of our young people are moving away, okay? We sometimes like to bury these topics in, $5 words, but the 10-cent truth of it is our young people are moving away. And they're doing that for three primary reasons. We've got a huge deficit in healthcare, which you've heard here. We've got a challenge to our local education program, our local schools, our public schools, et cetera. And then finally, we've got a lot of agricultural policy challenges right now. We know that moms are the key decision makers when it comes to determining whether or not a family is going to stay where they're located. And the bottom line is when you take away the good medical care and you take away good schools, and you put parents in a situation where they can't keep the small family farm running, or there's no opportunity to open small businesses, at some point moms say we need a better way of life. And the family packs up and they move to a bigger city, or they move to a rural area that's within what we call this 50-mile development zone around a big city where you can go work in town during the day and run the farm at night. The other thing I would say, and this has been said here, so I'm going to make it very brief, is what do we do for the people that are staying in rural America? Okay, look at me. I'm not a spring chicken anymore. Just had my hip replaced. And I'm young compared to the average farmer where I live in Missouri, and that's sad. Okay? So what do we do for the people that are staying in rural America, similar to what the representative said, better ag policy, making sure that people can stay on their farms, that type of thing. So this out-migration we can fix through better policy, but let's be honest about something. It's a 30-year trend in rural America, crossing both parties' realms of power over policy making in rural America. So I'm excited, Mel. Thank you for putting this on. The more conversations we have like this, the better, and the faster we can fix the problem. So.
Okay, thank you all. You can keep the mic down there to start. But before I go to the next question, I wanted to mention, I mentioned that Senator Holscher is running for governor, but I did not mention Christy Davis is running for the United States Senate. So I think it's fair that I mention that as well. Thank you for that. Okay, I'm going to add in a small follow-up question as we move to our other questions, that in a sentence or two, what are you defining as a small rural community in Kansas?
First of all, I'm not running for anything.
He's the smartest one.
There you go. We've got our statistical definitions of small town, but I think any small town or city that is primarily rural and agricultural falls into that category. The statistics on it would say, a certain level of population, a certain distance from a larger population center, that type of thing. But I almost feel like you know it when you feel it. You know when you live in rural America, you know when you live in a small town, and that would be my very simplistic redneck definition.
I'll go along with that. To me, it came from Garden City and then now in Emporia. Both are around 25,000, more or less, depends on the year. But both cities are distant from a major metropolitan area. We're probably a little over 60 miles Topeka, about 80 miles to Kansas City and Wichita. But we're right in the middle of the Flint Hills where Christy lives. A beautiful area, but it is, you know, a strong ag base there for the economy. If the ag economy isn't doing well, then it affects the overall community. And so I've you know, the number of counties that I guess are considered rural, I think it's well above 80 out of the 105 counties here in Kansas. And how many? 95. So yeah, it's a pretty strong rural state, but I think we've got some good folks out there to help us find our way through.
Yeah, I think really I can just ditto what Will said. I know it when I feel it or when I see it, because there are some areas that, you know, geographically, you know, by population size, you might consider rural, but certainly don't feel it. But, you know, geographically, that tends to be, to me, you know, so many areas that fit that definition in terms of, you know, what's being produced and what's happening there, you know, what's available in the area. So, like I said, I think that's pretty much what I fall. I know it when I see it and when I feel it.
I guess I know it when it feels like home, but, you know, part of the problem right now with policies and with addressing some of these challenges is that even our government entities can't agree on what rural is. And you all probably know this, and you probably agree with me, Kansas is very different because of the nature of the settlement of the state. We have lots of small communities spread over a large space, and if your number one concern is profit, sometimes services there don't make sense. But if that's where your family's been for 5 generations, it matters, right? 79% of the municipalities in Kansas right now have fewer than 1,500 people. Imagine that. We have close to 1,000 municipalities. When some federal government agencies define a rural community as 50,000 or fewer, that's Salina. To me, that's a big city, right? And so that's part of the challenge. As they've continued to centralize funding and other policies in DC, they've taken decisions from folks at the state level. I saw this when I was an appointee at USDA Rural Development. We were competing against rural communities whose applications for funding could say, our project impacts 50,000 people. Well, it's tough for a town of 900 or a county of 1,500 to compete. It doesn't make economic sense. If that's your only decision-making process, it's an issue and it doesn't work for Kansas. The one-size-fits-all doesn't work. I spent a lot of time, even at USDA Rural Development, talking to rural experts about what rural means in Kansas, and it is different. It's important for us. I think it's important that, you know, many of these communities survive, and that there are opportunities there so folks don't leave. But there are challenges with that. But part of it is just we haven't decided, and that's part of the policy issue.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we're going to move to the next question. Across Kansas, communities are rising concerns about affordability, from housing and inflation to property taxes. What would meaningful relief look like for rural and small town Kansas? And what policy choices could help us get there?
I've got the mic, so I'll just start again.
I should just go home because I got 3 politicians.
Affordability is huge. I think it's really important for people to understand. When I talk to people around the country and they look at Kansas, they say, well, these are areas that have been depopulating for a long time, so they must have a lot of extra houses lying around. And it just doesn't work that way. We saw that with a statewide housing study. Our problems are made worse every time there are cuts to federal programs that are meant to address it, because it falls to the folks at the state level, and it's why our property taxes are high. We have small tax base, and the less money we're getting from the top, the more we have to figure it out where the buck stops, which is usually city and county level. So just, you know, as a reminder right now, it costs the same or more to build a new house in rural Kansas, even though rural communities are seen as affordable, right? But it costs the same or more to build a house if you can get someone to build one, because the folks who are developing, you know, subdivisions, if
if they have a choice between building 100 at a time and one, it's not gonna happen. So it costs the same, and usually salaries and pay doesn't keep up. And we've been in situations where I live where we've got a new superintendent coming in. It's rare that we have new people coming in, but we have a new superintendent coming in or a new hospital administrator, and there's no place for them to live. And as a community, we kind of have to band together and figure out who's got an empty house and make it work. And then hopefully down the road, they're able to afford something on a salary that may not be as great as it would be elsewhere. So that's a huge challenge. Again, costs are the same, salaries are less, there's a little bit more of a built-in, safety net, but huge challenge, and that's why. And then you add tariffs and everything else. The other thing right now at the federal level is a lot of these federal programs were intended to subsidize the construction of housing, and especially in rural areas, and those programs have been eliminated, many of them.
There's a lot of talk about property taxes across the state, and high levels of property taxes in rural as well as urban areas. And here's the fact of the matter. It's the job of the state level to fund our schools, general ed as well as special ed. We have not been fulfilling that obligation. I'll just be quite honest with you. We're under court order to fund general ed, and we've been doing it, quote, adequately. But the state has not been fulfilling its objective and hasn't been doing so since 2011 on funding special ed. When that doesn't happen, guess what? Local level has to fill in the gap. That comes down to property taxes. And that happens all across the state. And that, like I said, amounts to property taxes going up. And that's a very negative effect in our rural areas. Additionally, I'll mention something else. In many of our rural areas, public schools are often the top employer. Now, we have seen over the past few years lots of attacks on public schools in terms of voucher plans, which are meant to divert funding from public schools to private. When those voucher plans are implemented, essentially what happens is tax money is being transferred from rural areas where often the only option is a public school, transferred away from rural areas really to the eastern side of the state where most of the private schools are located. You should be very angry about that when your legislators are talking about supporting voucher plans. And as a person who was raised in a farm community, it angers me because public education was my ticket out of poverty. And when legislators start talking about diverting taxpayer funds through vouchers, it makes me angry because I want to make sure that every child in Kansas has access to an adequate education, a strong education, no matter the zip code. And vouchers rob students of that. And again, when we don't do our job on the state level of funding both general ed and special ed, that hurts our communities through property taxes. Additionally, Medicaid expansion's been mentioned. Again, that's another area where we could greatly help our rural communities in terms of helping ensure that our hospitals in the rural areas stay open. What are we like, I don't know, what was the figure? 8 hospitals at least on the verge of collapse, and others 60 some, in that next bracket. So many other states have expanded, and here we are kind of an island that hasn't. We forfeit millions of dollars, and this is money that is ours. We have already paid into the system that we are sending to other states. It's negligent of us. It's downright shameful that we aren't taking the benefits of Medicaid expansion, putting into our communities to help our people, our hospitals, and again, our economies. And when it comes to housing, I think the figure is something like 40% of our housing in rural areas over 60 years old, so we have some maintenance issues to address there, and there hasn't been a whole lot of investment in terms of sometimes monies available to help in those communities to ensure that things are up to code and up to standards. So to me, it's those areas, ensuring that we're funding education, again, the healthcare access and the housing. Those are critical areas. It's important in urban areas, but boy, it's important in those rural areas. And like I said, as somebody who grew up in a rural area, grew up on a farm, You know, I've seen what happens when you lose your hospital. Then it's just your school that's left as the biggest employer. And we should be doing everything we can to hold on to that lifeline, making those investments, because then again, it'll help your property taxes too.
Okay, well, so I'll concentrate on property taxes, because it's been probably the number one issue we received at the Capitol this past year. And the legislature only has so many levers we can pull to reduce property taxes. I know people think, well, we can just go in there and say, counties, you can only spend this much and that's it. We could do that, but it would end up cutting a lot of services. What I think is really needed, and I think we got away from over the last couple of decades, is the community involvement in the budget process locally, in the city and the county levels. If you don't like the amount that the city and county are spending, go and talk to the commissioners and say, you know, I don't want all those snowplows out there. I don't want all those sheriff's deputies roaming around the county. I don't want all the police officers there. Whatever it might be, I think we've lost that understanding that those property taxes stay locally for the most part, and that's what pays for those services. And if you don't want those services or think they're being overcapitalized, then talk to the commissioners and let them know. I think we have gotten away publicly of saying, I've elected those people, they're going to make the decisions, and then when they make the decision, I'll complain to them then. The point is to do that early on and be active with them. I think they would really appreciate it. I know I do. When somebody comes up to me and says, well, why can't you do more on this? You know, sometimes it clicked with me like, oh yeah, I wonder why I don't do that. So I go start researching it and see what we could do. But they need that public input, and that is going to have the biggest effect on property taxes going forward, in my opinion. We have a couple of efforts right now in the legislature to cap increases in the local budgets and so forth. I'm not sure where it's all going to end up because it's kind of been kicked back and forth, and we'll probably address it here later next week. But I think that's an important piece. I think Cindy's exactly right with education as well. And it's one reason why I didn't vote for the budget this year was the lack of funding for special ed. We put in an additional $6 million into the budget, which doesn't even keep up with the growing expenses of special ed. I think we're about 67% funding of special ed right now. That even adding $6 million drops us below that 67%. We're not gaining ground. And we're really not tackling the problem like I think we should, is that we need to set a plan for how we're going to fund it. We don't have to do it all in 1 year, but we've got to make progress. And we just seem to be going backwards each year rather than tackling the problem and applying the money where it's really needed, because it just steals away from general ed classes and activities there to fund special ed. So those are my couple of thoughts on that. One thing that didn't get mentioned originally, and I'll just point out, so I'm a Republican. I'm the only one, well, I don't know if I will, but I know Cindy and Christy well. I respect them. I'm really more about good policy than the politics of things. I try to do my own research and come to a conclusion, talk to other people about what they're thinking on certain issues. But, you know, on some issues we agree, some we don't. But that's the same way with me and my wife, too. Sometimes we don't always agree. But anyway, here's Will.
Well, I just want to say I appreciate you being here. I really, really do. I should come with a warning label. So I'm a grandpa now. I cry at grocery store openings, okay? So if I blubber a little bit when I tell you this, just throw me a box of Kleenex and I promise I'll be okay. I think what you just heard here is that we know that bad policy is the driver of a lot of problems, or at least it's the driver of our failure to be able to fix a lot of problems. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the human side, because these are folks that are making critical decisions every day in the policy realm to help rural Kansans. I think we have got to do a better job as rural people of telling our own story. We get buried in the policy, and sometimes in doing that, in the culture wars and yelling at each other and shouting and screaming, and sometimes when we do that, personal stories get lost. I know you look at this perfect physical specimen in front of you today and you think, gosh, Will, it's hard to believe that when you were 12 years old, you got your arm caught in the power takeoff on a tractor on your farm, and you laid out on the ground for 2 hours bleeding out, waiting for an ambulance to show up to get you to the hospital. And in rural America, when something like that happens, you don't pray, God, let me live. God, I hope my insurance is paid up. You pray, God, I hope the ambulance gets here on time. I probably shouldn't tell this next story, but you had a little girl in Allen County, Kansas, just a week or two ago that got hit on her family farm. Worst case scenario as a parent, my God, I just can't even imagine it. One of her parents hit her with the farm truck. And this was her route to get to Children's Hospital in Kansas City. Mom and Dad threw her in the truck. They drove and got stuck behind a farm implement on the way there to meet an ambulance. The ambulance loaded her on board and then took her to a meeting place for a care flight. And then the care flight got her to Children's Hospital, and by that time it was too late. Those are the stories people need to hear. When we're talking about policy, when we say 1,000 rural hospitals could close in this country over the next 10 years, it means little kids are going to lay out on the ground bleeding out and they're not going to get to the hospital in time. It means when grandpa has a heart attack, he's going to die, not because we don't have treatment available to save him, but because it takes an hour and 15 minutes to get him to the closest medical center to get the care that he needs. So we've got to do a better job of telling our personal stories. The other thing is, we got to get a little bit rowdy in the process. And it doesn't matter if you're a Democrat or a Republican or an independent. We're all in this fight together. When you have a heart attack, the last question anybody asks is, well, are you a Democrat or Republican? It's, give me to the hospital. The second thing, I think that we have, in this rowdiness issue, I think we've got to take some of these laws to protect rural America out for a walk, especially our antitrust and monopoly laws. I always like to tease, people in rural America, regardless of what your political ideology is. I'm a 7th generation Missourian. We've got 5 and 6 and 7th generation Kansans here. Odds are your great-great-great-great-grandma and grandpa stood up as part of the Grange movement and raised hell because of monopolies in this country. It was built on the fact that monopolies have too much power. Think about that today. They control the price of fertilizer. They control the price of inputs. They control the price of construction materials that we need to build new schools, etc. in rural America. Time to get a little bit rowdy. All of us together. And there's no political party that owns the right to get rowdy. Hell, let's have a party and let's all get rowdy together. Let's stand up for ourselves. Now, and then the final thing I want to say is just that we're about to lose a way of life here. When we talk about the policy, and I think that's great because fixing the policy is what fixes the problem and it's what's going to save our rural communities, but we're about to lose a rural way of life here. Our average farmer in some parts of the country is 61, 62 years old. When all the young people are gone and all those older folks like me die off, it's going to be big ag that comes in to buy those farms. And the families that used to own those farms are going to be families that are working on them. And we don't want that to happen. We want to save these communities. Rural America has done great things over the years. Some of our biggest breakthroughs in agricultural science and healthcare have come from people of all races, of all backgrounds socioeconomically, that grew up in rural America, that were born here, that knew what it was like to live here, that lived the problem that they created the solution to solve. And I think there's a power in that. And once that lifestyle is gone, and once those people no longer exist, I think it'd be a damn shame to see rural America disappear like that. And we can save it. I refuse to believe that it's too late. I refuse to believe that. The last thing I want to say, and I think every politician here agrees with this based on what I've heard today, We have got to treat saving rural America like an infrastructure problem. When we went to the moon, we knew we weren't going to make a profit on day one. But look what happened after we did it. And I think the same thing can happen if we save rural America. Treat it like an infrastructure problem. Fix the hospitals not because there's a profit in it, but because it's the right thing to do. Fix the schools not because there's a profit in it, because it's the right thing to do. And what will happen? Young people will move back. New businesses will open. Schools will grow and get bigger. Small and medium-sized family farms and ranches will grow, and that will create more jobs. So treat it like an infrastructure issue. Invest in the good people of rural America, and I guarantee you, they've got the strength and stick-to-itiveness to make it work. So that's my short answer that's really long.
Thank you. What we're going to do is I'm trying to be mindful of time. I want to, because we're going to, before we close, we're going to take some questions from the audience. So I'm going to structure it this way. I have two more questions I would like to ask, and everyone, if you want to comment on the question, feel free, please do. If you don't find a need to comment on the question, because we somewhat touched on this. Will, you touched on it. Senator, you touched on it. However, we need to, I want to address it. The question is, Kansas has reported more rural hospitals who are at immediate risk of closure than any other state. What does that mean for the future of healthcare across in rural and small Kansas? And what solutions should be on the table to address this? Will, you had the mic, I believe.
Yeah, I'll make my answer really quick because I'd rather hear from the policy folks on this. All of that is true, and I think there are two things we've got to remember though about rural healthcare. Number one, if we lose these hospitals and clinics, all it's going to do is make the out-migration problem worse. More young families are going to move away, and it's going to leave a lot of old folks like me on their farms alone without good healthcare around them to be able to support them in their time of need. The other thing I want to say, though, is that we need to make sure that as we're fighting for rural health care, we understand it's a bigger issue than just expanding the ACA tax credits. That's a big issue, don't get me wrong, and the big beautiful bill did not help us by cutting $137 billion from rural health care, but expanding those tax credits is not going to save rural health care. We have got very specific issues in rural America, like offering programs to bring medical providers into rural America. How do we keep them there once they get there with competitive salaries, et cetera? So just remember that. Great resource on this, and I'm sure all these folks up here next to me use them, is the National Rural Health Association. They're a nonpartisan organization. I work with them every day, focused on solutions for rural health care. Go check them out, because they'll tell you we've got about 5 or 6 different things we need to do to fix rural health care. But I think the ramifications are, if we don't fix it, we're just going to continue to see out-migration, which will be bad.
So I think one of the bright spots that's come out of Congress is a rural health care transformation plan. And Kansas was awarded $50 million, I believe, to start off this grant process. I think, and it's just getting started, so it's really hard to see it right now, but it's designed to stabilize rural health care, get the services where they're needed, and this would include getting healthcare providers into those rural communities and so forth. That's going to take some time, but at least we've got some money going into this problem now, and hopefully that will come about, and we'll have better outcomes and save some of those rural healthcare facilities. Right now, if I was looking at it, and this grant wasn't available, I would say rural Kansas, there will just be transfer points to the major medical centers for healthcare. Just like the young girl in Allen County, flying it up to Kansas City. If you've got cases, you're going to get transferred. You'll check in at maybe a clinic in Western Kansas, get transferred to a bigger hospital in Wichita, Salina, further east. which is not good healthcare overall because you never know, especially in Kansas, weather-wise, if flights can fly. My sister in Garden City had some sepsis in her leg. It was in the middle of a blizzard. She needed to get to Denver or else she was going to lose her leg. The plane couldn't, they tried to take off. They couldn't take off because of the blizzard. They tried to go east to KU Med Center. They were full up because of COVID cases in the hospital. They didn't have any beds open. Finally, they just took off and started driving and made it up to Denver fine, and she's okay. But that's just one example of the fragility right now of our rural healthcare system. It's not, you're not getting all the services that I remember back in Garden City that you could get in one spot. Now you get transferred to specialists in other cities, larger cities. So, but I'm hoping this transformation plan comes together, that they really I thought they were saying I talked too long. That's what my wife says too. But anyway, but I'm hoping this transformation plan gets put together and we get the right people in place to make this an effective tool to save rural healthcare.
Well, I have really missed you. Over the past few weeks, the legislative session has been so busy, so I haven't been able to listen to you. So your comments have been excellent. So like I said, just thank you for what you did. I missed you too, Mark. Yeah. Mark, I started out in the House. My first election, I did 2 terms in the House and then crossed over to the Senate in 2020. So yeah, but when you're in the House versus the Senate, I mean, it's almost like you're on different planets. You may not see each other throughout the session, but when we're talking about rural hospitals, and yes, we have so many at immediate risk of closure. Back to Will's point, it's dangerous. I think everybody who grew up on a farm, you have these stories in terms of farming accidents or things that have happened. And I think back, there's 3 of us in my family. Probably 2 of us would not have survived if we hadn't had a hospital 12 miles away. And at one point, that hospital was gone. And I think specifically, on the farm, we would cobble together things in our shop. The green machine, I remember, different things made out of lawnmower parts. And I know at one point, my brother, one of my older brothers, his entire leg was slashed open. And again, if there hadn't been a hospital at that point 12 miles away, he probably wouldn't have made it. So what do we risk with the loss of our rural hospitals? Again, to Will's point, we probably risk losing lives, children or adults from farming accidents. Or the other thing that happens is you potentially have people getting life-flighted. If we don't expand Medicaid and save our hospitals, you're still going to pay for these things. And if we end up life-flighting people, think of the cost of that. We could save our hospitals for the cost that would be used to life-flight people, 3 hours away essentially. But the fact of the matter is, it's dangerous to lose our hospitals. It's a concern to our communities. And I think the statistic, when we look at it, hospitals in states that have expanded Medicaid are 6 times less likely to close in states that haven't. I mean, the proof's in the pudding, the proof's in the numbers. And why we haven't done it comes down to our numbers in the legislature. And I will tell you this, I mean, I am hopeful that this fall that we get some people into the legislature that are more reasonable. I don't care if they're Republican, Democrat, whatever. I've worked with Mark for years. We expanded Medicaid our first term, right?
Yep.
Yes. It got vetoed by Governor Brownback. We fell 2 votes short of overriding it, and then have been denied opportunity to take a vote on the floor since then. I would take a dozen more to like him. But unfortunately, we've been engulfed by a supermajority of people very extreme. Again, my hope is this fall that we make some changes, that we get, like I said, reasonable people who listen to the communities, who listen to our people, who have their best interests at heart, not the special interests. So I guess that's my, kind of my thought there is, Tell 5 friends every week about elections coming up and making sure they're getting out and voting.
Okay, I know we're short, I'll try to keep it short. I also agree with Will that we need to treat this as an infrastructure issue. It's similar to, there are things that we can also do in infrastructure that help with healthcare. One of them is broadband. I have the opportunity of managing about $1.3 billion in projects in Kansas through USDA rural development, and I learned a lot in that process. This is a problem that's, it's taken a long time to get this fixed, and it's going to take a long time to get out. But as a starting point, I think one thing that's key is protecting the investments we've already made. A couple years ago, I was at an opening for a hospital in a rural area. It was a regional facility, also a hospital like most in Kansas that rely on 50% of their revenue comes from Medicaid, even in Kansas. As soon as the cuts happened with the big beautiful bill, this hospital announced that it might be one of the first to close. They just opened, okay? The community, our federal dollars, our state dollars have gone to creating this entity. They did everything right, and policy's gonna mess them up. Huge concern. We have as many as 66 hospitals that could close. What was happening too with Medicaid expansion, and I tried to explain this to my state elected officials, we would get a double whammy, right? We know we need hospitals. We know that hospitals are not, they shouldn't just solely be profit driven, right? But what would happen is with federal policy in particular, we would have incentives for building hospitals. I worked on a $100 million hospital in Colby, for instance, great place. When we, historically in Kansas, we could run the numbers and we could determine whether those things were gonna make it or not. During the first Trump administration, so many of these decisions were centralized in Washington, D.C., and the truth is they don't understand what they're looking at. If they look at numbers from Kansas, it's scary. And part of it is, when you explain to them we don't have Medicaid expansion, it becomes pretty clear. It's affecting our ability not just to provide services, but to keep hospitals open. So even if you're not on a social safety net program, you're affected. I'm also really concerned actually about the kind of fix, the rural hospital program. There's some issues there. Again, in Kansas, I think our need is somewhere in the neighborhood of, so I think it's $50 billion over a period of 10 years. It's $5 billion a year for nationwide. And in Kansas, so that barely covers the need just in Kansas. And one of the concerns that I'm hearing from local hospitals is it is intended to be a long-term solution, like let's get some planning in place, let's look at, cost-benefit analysis and all of that, which we've always done with USDA funding and other funding for our healthcare. The challenge I see is it's a little too little, a little too late. They haven't defined rural, so we could lose out to rural New Jersey, right, which is the densest populated state in the country, when those programs work that way. So it's essential that we look at opportunities, but we need to protect the investments we've already made. That's a good start, because we've poured a lot of public investment in these things, and when we lose them, it's a lot easier to tear them down than to build them back up.
Okay, and as we're going to go into our last question before we decide to take audience questions, we talked about the issues of rural communities, of small town Kansas, but if we're able to get doctors, mental health providers, teachers, and other essential professionals, what can we do to build on that and sustain the workforce of the small communities where they can continue to thrive? How can we recruit, sustain, so they can thrive?
I think it's important to make a point that a lot of people don't understand. In DC, and a lot of times at the State House, especially if folks aren't in a rural area, they have this idea that if we address the issues in farming, we've taken care of rural America. Okay, only 2% of folks who live in rural America are actively engaged in production ag. So we have a lot of other folks to take care of. That's a huge, big deal. The good news for rural America is that there are more and more people who are able to work any place they want. And there are a lot of people who would like to live in a community where people care or move back to their hometown. It's really important to me that we provide opportunities for people to succeed in the communities that they're from. And I know there's a lot of need, regardless of what those folks have to offer. I mean, I live in a county that doesn't have a grocery store or a plumber, imagine. And I own a laundromat, so we've had to learn how to become plumbers, we're not great at it. So it's really important to have this, infrastructure in place, protect the investments that we already have. There are opportunities there, but we need policies that go beyond agriculture. It's essential, of course, it's our #1 industry in Kansas. We all understand that. We're sitting here at K-State, the first land grant institution, and go Cats. But we know that that's important, but there's so much beyond that, and there are a lot of community needs that aren't being met. I mean, it's why I know nothing about laundromats. We opened a laundromat. It doesn't make a lot of money, no, but is it a community need? Yes. There are a lot of community needs that need to be met, but we have to find ways to support those, because no one who is purely profit-driven is gonna invest without incentives.
I think it comes down to a couple different things. We've got to build up our teacher pipeline. We need some type of healthcare worker reform, because there's some issues there in terms of attracting healthcare workers to our rural areas, as well as teachers. But also I think it comes down to ensuring that our rural areas are desirable places to live. And I do see some great community partners, kind of like what Christy was mentioning. Like I think of Humboldt, Kansas, and there's some great community partners there that are doing things downtown. So I think when you see those things happening, and then if the state would do its part, the state level, in terms of, again, helping with these pipelines for teachers, doctors, and then coming back to fully funding our schools and fulfilling our obligations there. I mean, I don't think it's rocket science. I think we know what the ingredients are. We just have to have the leaders with the political spine to do the right things and fulfill the obligations that we need to fulfill.
Something we haven't talked about yet here with rural Kansas is, and really it's not only just in Kansas but elsewhere, is we aren't growing organically. Our death rate is increasing, our birth rate's declining. In Emporia, for instance, we lost 400 students this past year because a Tyson plant closed and moved their operation to their other plants. But Wichita's closing schools, I believe Garden City's closing some. But these are communities that people would think are growing and are vital, but we're just not getting students in because we're not creating them here. And the way I understood the last census was the only group of folks that was on the incline for the United States were immigrants. And I think a piece of the solution may be immigration reform that has been talked about for 40 plus years. And neither party wants to really tackle it because it is a hot button issue. But I think that has to get clarified. We need clarification on it. We're kind of band-aiding things along the way. And if we're going to grow, we're going to need immigrants. And I think we've got to set up the system where they can come in and work, be part of our communities and so forth, and add that valuable component to all our communities across Kansas.
Yeah, this is where the free market capitalist in me comes out. I do think if we treat this like an infrastructure problem and we fix some of the problems that are broken out there so that moms, those primary decision makers, can say, okay, I'm ready to move back home again because we've got good hospitals and we've got good schools and we can start our business there. When I was a telecom executive for many years, and I was fortunate enough to still be able to live in rural America while I did that job. But I did my time in the big city. I spent 6 years in Fort Worth, Texas. I spent some time in Columbus, Ohio. When I made the decision to move back home and get involved again in a family farm, we had a 300 cow-calf operation in Southwest Missouri. It was a sacrifice. I wanted to open a new business there, and I couldn't do it because of infrastructure and internet. et cetera. But I do think there's a component of this where if we've got the courage to work together across political party lines to get the infrastructure in place for rural America to grow, I think there's a natural free market reaction to that will take place, and people will begin to move back. I mean, just, you know, we talked before about, you know, we know rural America when we see it. How many times do we talk to our friends that have moved away from rural America that live in the city, and at least 3 or 4 times a year they're like, God, I'd move back in a heartbeat. What? If I could find a good job. If, you know, the ifs. If we solve for the ifs, I think they'll come back. The other thing I was going to say, and I'm a backslapper, so you're going to have a bruise here by the time I'm done, but I really appreciate you bringing up immigration reform, because my family, for some reason, my third great grandfather was sitting in Southwest Missouri, and when he was 58 years old, he got mad as hell because you Kansans and the Texans were driving cattle across his land to take them to Sedalia to put them on the railhead there. So he decided at almost 60 years old, 60 was different then than it is now, okay? That was like 108. He decided to drive 2,500 head of cattle out to liberal Kansas and down into the Oklahoma Panhandle, and he built a 60,000 acre ranch down there. Now, if you were to open up the yearbook back in that day, it would have been full of Westmorelands and Smiths and Johnsons and Crows and these types of names. Well, Guyman, Oklahoma started to die. Any of you that live out there, you know that. People moved away, out-migration was a big problem. All of a sudden, Guyman's alive again. But guess what? If you open up the yearbook, it's Gutierrez and Rodriguez and Gonzalez and all these families that moved in from Central America and Mexico. And this is the thing I think a lot of people don't get about immigration. It's always been a piece of our history. And if we embrace it and we get reforms so that people can come here legally, I think that these folks that want to come here for a better way of life, just like our ancestors did, they'll find it here, and rural America can grow. Because it is broken. Right now, the H-2A visa system, I was talking to some produce growers out in California. If you go through the legal pathway to come here to pick produce in the United States of America, on average, you show up in the field 22 days late. Well, you can just be a backyard gardener to know that if a tomato goes ripe on the vine and you wait 22 days to pick it, it's going to taste, well, you're not going to win any county prizes, okay, at the county fair. So I really appreciate you bringing that up as well. But I truly believe courage, fix the problem from a bipartisan perspective, people will come back. You men in here, what's your favorite line from the best male movie out there, Field of Dreams? If you build it, it will come. And I believe that wholeheartedly about rural America.
Okay, thank you all. What we're going to do at this moment is, if you have anyone in the audience a question, if you have a question that you would like, just stand up. And I'm sorry we don't have a mic out there, but you say your question and we'll try to repeat it and go from there. Okay, hold on. I'm going to bring the mic. Oh, you got it? Okay, there we go.
This is a question for the Cardinal fan on the panel.
We got one out here.
You mentioned a group that you work with a lot, National Rural Healthcare Association?
National Rural Health Association.
Health Association. Could you talk a little bit, I haven't heard of it, I'm gonna look it up after this, but could you say just a little bit about what it is?
Yeah, first thing, you're a nonpartisan group, so you don't get a lot of this slanted, you know, anybody can take a study and make it say what they wanted to say to get their political point of view across. What I really like about them is they just deep dive into the statistics. And they've done, every year they put out a report where they look at the viability of rural hospitals around the country, clinics, et cetera. They do a deep dive into what are the problems driving that. And the best part about it is they do a deep dive into these are the solutions that we need to fix it. And that's where I learned, you know, it's easy to just get mad and say, they took away the ACA tax credits and it's ruined rural health care. Well, the problem is so much bigger than that. I don't think that was a good move, but there are a lot of other things that we've got to do along with expanding those tax credits to fix the problem. If I could give a plug for one other group, the National Rural Education Association. The National Rural Education Association. Also very bipartisan, very focused on rural issues.
And there's a chapter that's based out of K-State, by the way.
With that one, there's a chapter that's based out of K-State, the rural educators.
Okay, we had another question in the back.
Hi. This question, I guess it is in regards to rural health care. So I know that there is bipartisan support in the Senate and the House for SB 360, which would kind of put some regulation on those pharmacy benefit managers, which really has a play in how rural health care does. Now, from what I'm understanding is that it keeps getting transferred between committees in the House from the Speaker of the House, who coincidentally also owns an insurance agency. Are we going to be able to get that passed during this session, or is it going to have to come up in the next session? Because I know that probably will help a lot of those rural hospitals.
So, okay, so we passed that, the House passed that legislation. I believe the Senate has also picked up.
Yes.
Senate Bill 20 now. Rolled into Senate Bill 20. Senate Bill 20. 20? Right. Sorry. Sometimes we change numbers in the middle of the
You can see
game.
how the sausage is made here.
That's their committee assistants.
So it was adopted. Pretty sure this is it, isn't it?
Senate Bill 20. Sorry, things get gutted and.
This is
Seems-
bipartisan.
That's right, that's right. We work well together with the owner.
So, okay, the PBM program is what got.
That's,
Use the mic.
that's what you were asking, right?
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I'm not, from a state legislative perspective, these guys are in the thick of it. I'm not, but the reason that I'm familiar with this is that, as I said, I live in a town of 900, and we have a new pharmacy. Yay! I was their first customer. I'm pretty proud of it. I continue to work with them because I go in and discuss policy issues. This is a huge issue for them. I was at the State House this session and also last session when pharmacies from all over the state came. A lot of last year, they actually shut their community pharmacies down en masse and went to the State House to lobby for it. It didn't happen last year. They thought that it would come back this year. It did. There's overwhelming support for it. But the truth is, the folks who are the leaders decide, you know, what keeps moving forward, even when issues have overwhelming support. It's just this issue that affects every area of policy is this idea that there's always a middleman there that can take more money out of the system, and it's always affecting, you know, when the middlemen do that, it's the little men that are affected. So it's my understanding from talking to my local pharmacists regularly that, you know, they were really disappointed. It died. The thought was maybe it would get thrown in, you know, as a bargaining chip, as an amendment, but I think it's dead this year.
PBM?
Yeah, PBM, thank you.
The PBM part of it did?
Yeah.
Okay, was that?
Yeah, PBM reform is one of the few things that actually made it through the process this year, through really almost a coup in the House in terms of overcoming the actions of the Speaker of the House, who, as you mentioned, really did not want it. So it was really a process, like I said, to try to get that through the House, and honestly in the Senate too, because we have a couple of insurance agents who were very much opposed to it, and the bill itself had to be routed through a different committee just to be able to make it through the process. So a lot of maneuvering just to try to get it passed. So it hopefully will lower prescription prices for, you know, some of the medications out there. But it was a lot of effort for something that, you know, shouldn't have had to be so difficult to get. But I think it does illustrate the hurdles that, you know, are there, that are present for a bill that really shouldn't have been that complicated and shouldn't have been that difficult to get through. And if you think perspective-wise, you know, if we're talking about other bills like Medicaid expansion, medicinal cannabis, other things like that. You know, to try to get one of those more complex bills through the process, again, so much maneuvering, whereas this one, like I said, has been there for years, should have been much easier to get through, but took a whole lot of maneuvering to get it through the process.
Okay, we had one more question.
Thank you, I appreciate that. I appreciate the panelists talking about rural infrastructure. And one of the infrastructure issues that some of you talked about is the loss of our grocery stores. I'm part of the Rural Health Transformation Program that K-State University is part of. And in that $220+ million allotment this year is food as medicine. However, where do you get the food? And how do you make the food make sure it's distributed in such a way where that tomato is still worth eating? So the concept of a food shed that Michigan State is looking at, a food shed where food is distributed, not just charitable food, but corporate business involved with food access and food distribution. So some of our grocery stores have interest in that, but they're having a hard time because they are lost revenue because of the SNAP benefits that are being cut. So if we cut SNAP benefits, then it also depletes access to food and grocers still staying open. I'd like to hear your remarks about keeping food available and keeping food affordable, especially if we want to keep rural Kansas alive.
Two of you all want to comment?
So we learned a lot about food and distribution during COVID. As part of the Biden administration, we had a huge emphasis on improving transportation and improving those supply chains because we all learned the hard way, you know, what the challenges were. The concern though is it's a huge problem to fix. We have had industrial agriculture, as you know, for 100+ years. Kansas has benefited from that with the systems that we have. USAID, I mean, we've been out feeding the world. The SNAP is affecting small producers and, of course, grocers. Again, I live in a county that doesn't have a grocery store. We had one that was, it's also a middleman situation, right? Because you've got these distributors and they have minimums. We had a truck that they raised the minimum grocery order for a week to $20,000 a week. That's a lot in a small community. We were sharing a truck with a town down the road, and when they closed, we closed, which put us all driving to, if you're unlucky, Walmart is your option. So we were working on those issues. It's not an easy problem to solve. My concern, when people say things like, okay, farmers, you know, we have these tariffs, now you can just turn around and start raising food for your own community. It's not that easy. We have a system that's been in place for a century or more, and it's not an easy fix. And a lot of those programs that were in place, similar to what we were talking about with Kansas Black Farmers, those programs that were in place not only were defunded but clawed back. So we were in the process of beginning to address some of these things. Again, it wasn't going to be an easy fix, but that money's been clawed back.
Okay, I'm sorry. Christy.
I'm just going to mention, you know, our markets are gone for some of our farmers due to the tariff situation. So we're going to have to find new things for them. And something that goes through my mind, yeah, we have some deserts out there in terms of food deserts where fresh foods aren't available. There's something else that goes through my mind. You know, a lot of our schools out there have been doing packaged products. I mean, you know, why not make this pivot now in terms of our farmers growing foods that are for our schools? Much better in terms of nutrition. You know, I appreciate that we feed the world, but how about feeding our students and our people right here? And like I said, some of our markets are gone now, so we have to be making some very significant transitions. And there's some things that we definitely can do, and that's one of the things I'm looking at.
Do I need 30 seconds? I promise. So shameless plug, watch the Back 40. We're going to be doing a whole series of videos on this. We're going to be doing a farm and table series of videos. We're going to go visit a chicken and protein operation up in Kansas, by Kansas City, up in Kansas, we're in Kansas, up by Kansas City, where we're going to talk about people that are already doing farm and table, because some of the biggest requests I get in response to my social media is, how do I establish a farm and table relationship with a farmer? The other thing we're going to do that's kind of cool is we're going to talk to one of the largest food distribution companies in the United States. We're going to have a sit down with them and do some videos. They want to buy locally. The question is, how can we produce in enough volume as small producers in rural America to give them the option to be able to do that? So shameless plug, the Back 40, it's Westmoreland Pops on all your social media platforms.
Sometime I'll do that.
And we have one more question. Oh, okay, actually, we're gonna take two more questions. I'm gonna go here, then, all right.
Hi, thank you all for being here today. This is going to be a little bit more agricultural oriented. I'm a graduate student researcher here at K-State, studying agritourism and rural economic development. And what we found when talking to agritourism operators and producers across the state is that they're struggling with the lack of state and federal funds and grants that are open to them. In which ways are you supporting them, or in which ways can you support them as they're looking to expand their businesses and keep those family farms running?
Sounds like.
Okay, please forgive me. So my background is in cultural resource management and heritage tourism, also a K-State grad, okay? But I've been involved directly in agritourism. I spent 6 years as an executive director for Symphony in the Flint Hills. Some of you may be familiar with that organization. It's a conservation organization, but it's an agritourism organization. They're done. They've shut down. They can't continue to operate, and part of it is that it's just difficult to be sustainable. We do in Kansas have good laws that provide some protection for our agritourism folks, as far as safety and so forth, and that is helpful. But as you know, I mean, so many of the funds that were available for cultural resource management, agritourism, all of that, especially through arts, we had a lot of things that are happening through the arts that we were able to kind of leverage. Those programs were federal programs, there was federal money, and that's not there. And sometimes there is federal money, but we don't have the state money to match it. There's a lot of federal grants available, but those state agencies don't have the money to go out and do the match for it. As far as long-term solutions, there's a lot of, and we can talk later, but there's a lot of really good data on the economic impact. I mean, what I've always found with arts and culture and tourism too is some people just don't care about arts, culture, and tourism, but they do care about the bottom line. And there's great numbers that show that is a huge economic activity and economic boom. I mean, it's why I live in the Flint Hills, right? Those were things that drew me back to that area. And so it's a question of priorities. Right now, we all think we're overtaxed, which we are. Every time they cut those federal programs, that's affecting us at the local level, and there's not a lot of incentives at the local level to do it. Most of the communities that I've worked in, Emporia would be an exception to the rule, by the way. They have great funding for this type of thing, but you know, if you don't have a city manager or a county administrator, you don't have a grant writer. So there's nobody even if that money's available, there's no one to access it and usher it through. And then with the way things are structured now, you're always going to be competing at the national level. So I guess the solution, let's talk. I'd love to hear what you have to say.
Anyone else want to? All right, we go to our final question.
So we've talked a lot about policy solutions.
They like you at K-State College? They
I
like you
love K-State. There's another university here in Kansas, in case you weren't familiar with. We talked about these policy solutions and bipartisanship. We've got two Democratic politicians up there. I'm running for Congress. I'm a Democrat. We love bipartisanship as the third biggest political group in Kansas after Republicans and Independents. Particularly for Mark and for Will, as a Republican and as a communicator, how do you see bipartisanship transmitting and communicating and convincing Republican voters, because when the State House gets to work, it's anti-immigration bills, anti-trans bills, anti-election bills, not a word about bipartisanship. And they must think the Republican voters want that. So how do we reach out to those Republican voters and convince them that bipartisanship is something to actually cross lines and vote for? In other words, how do we take power away from you and give it to ourselves?
Great question. I wish I had a wonderful answer, but I'm going to borrow what Will said earlier. And this goes whether you're lobbying, on a particular cause or just trying to, gain some traction with the other party, is tell your story. Storytelling, and I was a lobbyist for 15 years. I can cite facts and numbers and stuff to your eyes closed. And the piece that sticks the most with people are the stories. They don't have to be long, they don't have to be graphic or anything. They just need to be told. And right now, you're right. We live in a political environment where, I wouldn't be surprised if somebody doesn't find out that I'm up here with two Democrats, one running for governor, one running for senator, that why is he, is he a rhino and he doesn't even belong in the Republican Party. That's kind of water off a duck's back for me. It doesn't faze me at all because I'm focused on good policies, and I think a lot of my colleagues are too, Republican colleagues. But the pressure for them to conform to a party line is huge, and I understand that. I mean, fortunately, I live in a community in a district that's pretty purple, and so I have Democrats that like me, Republicans that like me, and I have Democrats that don't like me, and Republicans don't like me. But I'm not here to make this a career for myself and retire in another 20 years, but I'm out there to try to make good policy, and I try to do my research. But when you're trying to convince somebody, hey, this is a really good idea, tell them a personal story of something that's impacted you. I've got dozens of stories that I've seen as a lobbyist and as a legislator. People come in and just tell me a little story, and it's like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize this was the impact. I heard the numbers, I saw the graphs, but that story stuck with me, and that's why I voted the way I did.
So Mark and I are like the exceptions in respect to, he's a Republican in the purplish area. I'm a Democrat, the only Democrat in the Senate that comes from a red area. And I'm one of the most successful Democrats in terms of getting bills passed, and a super majority of Republicans. And Mark is absolutely right in terms of, making progress. It comes down to, telling that story in terms of what it is that is behind the bill that you're pushing. And I see that with people who come in and advocate for different issues. And sometimes people think, well, is it important that I come to the Capitol? Yeah, it really is in terms of if there's an issue that you're pushing. And Mel, bless her heart, she comes to the Capitol, and other advocates come to the Capitol to share that story. Because otherwise, if it's just reading testimony or just reading an article, it's hard to bring that to life. But when people come in and share that story, it does make an impact. And I will tell you, I worked for 4 years in statute of limitations reform, and for victims of sexual violence, and Mark helped on that. When survivors came in and told their story, that's when that moved. And like I said, and it was tough for them to come and do it, but that's what made the difference. And that's made the difference on other bills too, people willing to tell their stories. Myself, sharing stories relative to some of these different bills. But again, maybe we get a few more friends too, like I said, in terms of people who are very reasonable, that makes it a little easier in terms of the process.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, can we give our panel a round of applause? And can you give yourselves a round of applause for being here? As we come to a close, we want to say thank you to a few people in I'm probably gonna miss someone, but first, let me start with the panel. Thank you all for being here, taking time out of your busy schedules. We also want to thank our ASL interpretations. Let's give them a round of applause. And we want to thank the Young Democrats. Kansas Young Democrats. And Miss Mel, thank you. We have tables set up, and the panelists are going to be here to answer questions, talk to you. They took time out to decorate their tables, so please stop by and see them, get some information. And we have refreshments in the back. I think that we have ham, turkey sandwiches. Okay, we may not have that, but we have some refreshments. And yeah, thank you. So at this time, we're going to come to a close and make sure we get around and shake hands, visit, and share with each other. Again, thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
I'm sorry? Cowley County, so south of Wichita. Just